88-year-old Alfred Eisenstadt, the father of photojournalism, told 15-year-old me, "Be interested in everything." It was a personal and professional mandate if I ever heard one, and China was not going to make it as an exception, especially after all I'd experienced so far. It was a place whose mystery only grew in spite of the accounts coming from all sides, whether Western news media, Hollywood, or Chinese propaganda. It was always on the horizon to find out the reality of the place. The more it was fogged by conflicting accounts, the stakes just seemed more astronomical, and the more I wanted to see it for myself. I couldn't muster the resources to cross out of Hong Kong when I was there in '92 on vacation from seafaring rotations with American Hawaii Cruises, where I'd slaved away as an assistant waiter, cabin steward, and bellhop, the kind of work you do when you're 19 and really ready to break out into the world. But this was the morning, today, that the fate finally crawled out into the open again. My half-sister Ellen was meanwhile killing it in the corporate world. If it was any indication, she eventually ended up marrying the CFO of one of the biggest tech companies on the planet. At this stage, she was still at GM and had not only secured a position across that elusive border in Guangzhou, but had also heard about my struggles as an aspiring filmmaker.
Why don't you come to teach English and see if you like it? There's so many opportunities here right now.
She was emphatic over the phone that she could introduce me to people through AmCham in Beijing. I wasn't making much from the temp agencies that were sending me into this or that cubicle on Wall Street. The best hope for a successful film had evaporated, lost in the mess of conflicting interests and vanity. And China seemed all the more better distraction than Ezibar. A few internet queries for English schools, and 3 weeks later, I was on a 767 from Newark to Beijing. When I stepped off the China Eastern 727 from Beijing into the fresh post-dawn tarmac in Shenyang, the burnt, coal-tinged frigid air instantly froze the inside of my nostrils. The news said it was the coldest day in 50 years. By now, it was a familiar reprise, emerging from a carrier vessel as if in some strange form of rebirth, last experienced stepping off a different jet in Honolulu, just 10 years ago. There, the distinct fragrance of tropical flowers and humidity defied the industrial airport setting. I was 19, experiencing perhaps the first rebirth of several more that would follow. In 1991, Honolulu was a much-needed break from New York. Now, one divorce and no kids later, I had left again. Life was becoming a series of echoes, each one just a different flavor configured from the one before. But this time, adding to the contrast, the mayor of this city had just been executed for corruption. Also, this time I was going to be teaching English to kids aged 10 to 14. This was my foot in the door, the easiest way in. A lot of people might have avoided mentioning it, but the kids made all the difference to me. The lifestyle was easy, good pay and free apartment and desktop with internet access in an urban setting. Of course it was being monitored, but I didn't have much to do online beyond catching up on Yahoo News, movies, and getting what I could out of Napster. The police ran a routine search of my apartment after I'd settled in, which I didn't mind. I hadn't even had a chance to get involved in anything that would feed the pervasive every foreigner is a spy mentality. Yet. The short-haired, middle-aged, attractive chaperone who welcomed me into the country stood at the gate, now blasted with dawn's sunlight. She wore white PVC boots and a decidedly futuristic faded peach coat in broad, simple folds that evoked Issei Miyake, a kind of bizarre, deeply inside joke, a personally striking manifestation of the female lead's look I'd imagined in the script for Ishii-san. Customs was as surprisingly expedient as the baggage claim. We exited into the outside air again for passenger pickups. I dropped my bag, a surplus U.S. Army duffel, into the trunk of the black Santana that had been waiting for us. Unlike the navy blue turtleneck and black suit-clad driver who spoke no English, The escort was happy to practice what little she seemed to know.
Do you like Chinese food?
How would I consider coming to a country to live and work if the food was going to be a problem? I summoned memories of cashew chicken inside the pink and blue neon-drenched Empire Sichuan kitchen on 97th and Broadway. I've had a couple of favorite dishes, yeah.
Oh, good. We are going to take a breakfast first. Is that all right? At the hotel?
Hotel?
The apartment is still being prepared.
Oh, okay. Well, will I be in the hotel for long?
Just one day and one night. Is that all right?
No problem. The drive took us past occasional Soviet-style statues and architecture, reminders of an earlier, more desperate recent past. In fact, there was quite a bit of organized crime that had lived in the dark, left to take over since the Soviets pulled out without leaving much in the way of management. The hotel lobby at the Intercontinental downtown was part of some of that unbalanced extravagance, with an outwardly manicured staff that seemed overprepared. The expectations for business weren't being met and were quite possibly the result of overreach by the construction company, with someone getting more money from a contract than they deserved. Once in the quiet isolation of the room, I dropped my solitary duffel onto the floor. The contract signing was at the company tomorrow, which is really why I was still in a hotel. That evening, I stared out the window at the red Chinese neon characters choking and the humid, cold-drenched, chilly, volumetric scatter outside, beneath the gradient orange urban glow across the skyline. I'd dug into my belongings and retrieved my Sony cassette player to reconnect with my life soundtrack, which for weeks had been Cliff Martinez, Fatboy Slim, and Morcheeba from the soundtrack to Soderbergh's Traffic, the second-to-last film I had seen while still in the U.S. The very last film was Castaway, which was really feeling like an increasingly appropriate send-off. January 13th, 2001. Government Square, Shenyang. On contract day at the company, I met the other foreign teachers, both in their 20s. Donnock, barely heavy-set and unabashedly freewheeling, was from Ireland. Joelle, a distant relative of Charles Darwin, was a cheery free-floater. She was blonde, attractive in a cigarette-smoking European kind of way, and impossible to ignore for just about every local person in our path. We all stood out, but Joelle was so much more of a spectacle that a local radio celebrity DJ, Matthew, walked up to her in a cafe and asked her to go on his show. I wasn't there to be the celebrity the company thought they could use me for. I was just too caught up in trying to make sense of planet Shenyang to be bothered outside of class for anything else. I saved some money and bought a Sony Vaio at China Computer Town, a market for all things digital. I also took home a copy of Deus Ex, which is more than likely pirated. It was just what I needed to escape into a computer role-playing first-person shooter with a cyberpunk edge, with some of the conspiracy drivel mixed in. The New York gameplays sent me back to Clubland again, in a limited 16-bit kind of way, and the Hong Kong levels somehow blended into real life. As soon as we were past all the signing and orientation, it was time to return to the snow-strewn wet streets and traffic outside. The company itself was a joint venture, and its American CEO, Pete Carroll, was a much earlier transplant from Chicago, but close to my age. I chose to keep my sister's presence at the embassy in Beijing a non-mentionable non-issue. This was a move of prudence to avoid unwanted attention, a potential problem multiplier on top of the regular doe-eyed stares that the foreigner appearance already triggered among the vast majority of locals. Joelle, though, always got the most attention. Outside in the open air, now free from tedious corporate pleasantries, the four of us stood waiting for the streetlight to cross the busy boulevard. The surrounding snow was already melting into gray slush, accenting the traffic noise. The escort who'd met me at the airport was still contractually bound to finish our business before she would leave the company the following week. She offered us lunch while a fourth foreigner, not in the itinerary, slowly approached us with blazing curiosity right there in Government Square. A jet-blackish apparition, clad in an old green army jacket and equally worn-in boonie. We looked at each other for a moment, almost marveling at our respective novelty.
Are you an American?
Yeah, I said.
Cool, I'm Monroe. You here for a while, or?
Yeah, at least a year. We all just got out of orientation. This is Joel from the UK and Donnock from Ireland.
Cool, guys. Well, we'll come on down sometime to Sophie's if you haven't yet. Really cool place to hang.
Monroe continued his gaze with the look of a worried parent, his conversation rushed and as unobtrusive as possible. He pulled out a pen and scrawled the address onto the back of a receipt and handed it to me.
Cool, we'll see you there sometime. All right, enjoy you guys. Catch you later.
Monroe ambled off, and that was how we discovered Sophie's, the fated expat bar where I would meet Richard, a Korean American and fellow New Yorker. The warm weather had arrived along with the general soot and lived-in stench of swelling desperation that plagued the city ever since the Soviets left their unmistakable style and statues and influence in a spurt of economic and industrial support decades back. By the next year, I'd become used to a 3-day work week, a downright peachy existence with generous benefits. I had an above-average apartment and endless, unrelenting attention as a curiosity on the street to a large population that was otherwise isolated from anything from outside, let alone American. Once I had settled into a routine, I had some more room for some unfinished interests to come up for air again, and it was at this time that the contact I'd had with Robert Steele seemed like something that was time to refresh. My initial email to him from China had gripped his interest more than he had mine, since I was actually on the ground in China, in what I only later realized was an operational hub for North Korean intelligence activities. A senior North Korean counterintelligence official, Kang, was based at the Zhongpu International Hotel there, leading elite cyber units from that city, and facilitated secret visits by foreign nuclear scientists to Pyongyang. Shenyang was not just geographically proximate to the North Korean border. It was a contested intelligence environment where American, Chinese, North Korean, and South Korean operatives all operated, sometimes visibly, sometimes not. The South Korean consulate in Shenyang was itself a focal point. Defectors tried to enter it, brokers operated around it, and Chinese authorities had tightened security around it just as I arrived. Steele wanted to visit the Great Wall and enthusiastically pried at any opportunity to set up some kind of dialogue for intelligence. This led to an initial meeting to discuss the possibility of a conference, but the Chinese I had met with one night through an associate of Pete's education enterprise wanted $20,000 up front, with no guarantee the conference would pass approval on their side. Steele and I backed off, but it did get me an email address at his company, panda@oss.net, as it also stated on the business cards he'd approved for me to print out on my side. After a week of finally moving on, Annie, an ebullient newlywed, a rock and roll fan, and one of several Chinese staff I had befriended at the school, had graciously insisted on pulling me out of the stovepipe, the classroom, a symptom of Chinese paranoia that persisted as a cultural paradigm among foreigners. Annie had been preparing to leave the company, one more to add to the high turnover rate of teachers, but was a genuine friend, harboring deep empathy for a clueless newbie like me. She also brought me to my first bar in China. It was not long after she left me on my own, though, that I was attacked by a jealous businessman whose mistress was already sitting down with me, drinking whiskey. The businessman screamed in his best English before he was promptly scuffled from the bar by the security staff. I continued letting the mistress practice her English. A beer girl with close-cropped short hair and a revealing silver Budweiser promotional outfit stood at the ready in case I wanted to switch up the booze. The multicolored neon flashed off her body in multiple directions, conjuring memories of the short-haired siren I wrote up for Ishii-san. I almost ordered a beer from her just on that premise when another American walked in with a relaxed stride. Jeff from Queens was a bald, middle-aged trainer for the International English Language Testing System, or IELTS. Being the only two foreign guys in a mostly empty bar was a pretty strong get-to-know-you conversation starter. During the course of it, he dropped his card next to my coaster.
It's great to see New York still alive, man, even out here in this shitty desert.
Shenyang's underworld had supplanted the void in civil engineering left by the Cultural Revolution and then by the sudden vacancy of Soviet support, and by default engineered a very bespoke societal infrastructure. This made it all the more easy for Jeff to graft in regular visits by prostitutes, often 2 at a time, and any illicit narcotic that was in fashion for the evening. Jeff's salary was competitive, and his reputation was still unshakable as a teacher. He had planned to return to New York sometime the next year, having had his fill of all the vice he could ingest in this place.
Ever been to Beijing?
He asked, also now eyeing the short-haired Budweiser siren. Not yet, I said.
You should hit up the ad agencies. They have a pretty high turnover of foreign staff right now, since no one is adept at his English as you apparently are.
Jeff replied.
That charm you're pulling with this chick right here, even though out here it's some Superman level shit, it's not gonna get you anywhere in Beijing.
Jeff pulled out his phone, scrolling messages.
I'm going to give you this guy's number. His name's Orville. If you need anything, and I mean anything, give him a call. He's Canadian, but really well connected.
It would yet be a full 3 months before I would ever make it to the capital. But on another night, still in my cultural acclimation phase, desperate to counter the isolation that characterized the cold months, Annie called. Tonight she was offering a tour of Shenyang's night market. Wading through the dimly lit crowd, we moved past the usual t-shirts, sunglasses, and white plastic dolls dipped in glitter. As the vendor stalls thinned out towards an edge near an alley, I stopped because at first I couldn't figure out what the hell this particular vendor, a wizened, world-weary woman in her 50s, was selling. I hadn't seen a bulky green CRT computer monitor like this since high school in New York in 1987, let alone Chinese characters lighting up the screen. To add to the confusion, the vendor's customer sat on a stool by the screen wearing a blood pressure strap with wires running from his arm to a brick-sized modulator, which itself was connected to the hard drive. The vendor pressed enter, and a chart populated with more Chinese characters popped up on the screen. What the hell is this? I asked Annie, all the curiosity of Deckard approaching the Cambodian woman at Anemoid Row.
She is a fortune teller.
What?
A fortune teller.
Okay, but what's with the computer setup? Annie relayed my question to the vendor and listened, reacting with confusion and amusement as the vendor spoke. Annie turned to me again, still processing the explanation.
She uses the computer, which reads the person's unique energy, to tell their fortune.
What the hell?
Yes, it's very unusual. I've never heard of this before.
As her customer paid her a 20 renminbi bill and left, the vendor gestured at me if I would like to try.
She wants to know, do you want to try?
Said Annie. All I could do was shake my head, blink my eyes, unable to field the moment with any words beyond a mumble in English. No, but that's pretty weird. I don't think I've ever seen anything this weird even back in New York. Shenyang somehow pulled off an unexpectedly hard left into cyberpunk. Sophie's bar was the only next logical step for me. Annie hailed a taxi.
Okay, so I have to meet my husband. Will you be okay? You can find your way back?
Yeah, I'll be fine. The taxi lurched forward, leaving Annie behind as she hailed her own ride. I was alone with no idea how much weirder the night was going to get. The taxi pulled into a quiet residential street corner, faithfully lit up by a greenish-blue street lamp. The loitering engine and the taxi's headlights soon disappeared. Once the taxi was gone, The lack of pedestrians and the thick nighttime quiet let the aging concrete walls speak a kind of mysterious, clean, ancient placidity, which reminded me of Tokyo and that night with Juka. I could also hear the muffled sounds of laughter, conversation, and ELO's "Don't Let Me Down" through the door across the road. Rock and roll had already become a novelty in this cold, hidden part of the world, operating on an entirely different heartbeat. I opened the door and walked into the music. There were some 20 other foreigners I'd never met before. In later visits, they never went beyond casual next seat acquaintances at the bar. Monroe motioned to me from a seat near the end of the bar, eager to discuss a new experimental short film project I'd mentioned over the phone since we'd become better acquainted. In the need to make sense of this new environment, a film, as an extension for my photography, was a terrific way in. The foreigner label was a burden strong enough to galvanize non-Chinese into more cohesion, regardless of professional relationship. By now, both I and Pete, my American boss, were completely comfortable running into each other almost regularly at Sophie's. An argument over the American relationship with Taiwan erupted at one of the tables closer to the bar, engaging a variety of accents, from Australian to British to a very authoritative female Californian, emphasizing the American policy of maintaining status quo.
"Hey, you are American?"
said another behind me. I turned and confirmed he was distinctly Korean American. "Yeah, I just got in about 6 months ago."
"I haven't seen you here before. I come here sometimes when I catch a break from work. Where are you from?"
"New York."
"Really? I used to live in Koreatown, you know, the 32nd Street?"
His name was Richard Park.
"A typical Korean name, right?"
he said. Richard ran an import-export company with his wife. He named the company New Shen. That's the New for New York and the Shen for Shenyang. I stuck to Jack and Coke. This was also the very first drink I ever had, placed casually in front of me by the Nicaraguan bartender at the bar across the street from my hotel in Managua when I was there so many years ago. Drinking never really appealed to me again until around the last time I was leaving New York, sitting at Windows on the World with a Taiwanese friend, with no hint of the destruction that would follow just months later.
"Hey, do you want to go to a North Korean restaurant?"
Richard asked as casually as possible. His tone didn't make it any less awkward. I wondered what that could mean, given the reports of starvation in the face of the country's spending priority on armaments over food. Trying to process it conjured a memory of buying a meal at an Ethiopian restaurant in New York for a hacker I'd met at one of the monthly 2600 gatherings every first Friday by the payphones in the City Court building back in New York. The hacker finally confessed that he was on the run from the FBI after breaking into NASA. I'd convinced the poor guy to turn himself in, but it was the last and only time I had ever paid for a meal from a country known for a hunger crisis. "What do they have on the menu there? Grass?" Richard kindly brushed aside my ignorance.
"No, you will like it. The girls are really pretty too. You ever seen a girl from North Korea?"
"No, not that I know of," I answered.
"Listen, I'll take care of everything. Just let me introduce you. A lot of land in Shenyang used to belong to Korea, so they have a lot of people from Korean background still living here. Do you want to go?"
Sophie's had run out of novelty. It was a long way from Mother in the meatpacking district. The opportunity to visit North Korea had crossed my path before. The year before, at the annual July 4th party hosted by the U.S. Consulate, 2 Americans approached me with an offer to smuggle me across in return for 4,000 renminbi, about $500. Lots of people had already done the trip, they said. Yeah, not looking to wind up in the news. I turned them down. Didn't they have enough professional spies? But Richard here was offering the next best thing, to defy political boundaries and make contact with citizens of a country I wasn't really legally allowed to visit. By the time we got into a taxi, the inebriation had already set in, leaving me wide open to discover more of whatever was waiting around the corner, anything to pull me out of the mundane. Since my arrival 6 months ago, I'd already pushed through a raging dust storm that blew into Shenyang all the way from the Gobi Desert. I'd spent the night at my first massage spa under guidance from a local rock guitarist who would later introduce me to a budding club of aspiring filmmakers, a shadow of the same buzz that fizzled in New York, their hopes and dreams in independent cinema fueled by the new promising surge of digital video technology. But tonight, the host was a fellow New Yorker. I think he needed to show me, someone who knew where he was from, a world that few around us, if any, could otherwise conceive of, so he could feel understood, connected, not alone. We stumbled into our first stop, lit with tortuously bright fluorescence. Shiny white ceramic teacups clacked on glass tables, and the simplest of beer glasses were filled and refilled with steadily accumulating 600 milliliter glass bottles of Yanjing beer. We'd no sooner sat down at a table just being vacated as Richard asked me if I'd noticed the Middle Eastern guy talking about his own desire to blow up or attack anything American. I turned to the exit door where we just walked in, but the Middle Eastern guy was no longer there. "Are you serious? Is that what he said?"
Yeah, you didn't hear him?
Asked Richard, just as a hanbok-clad waitress drew close to the table, her thumbnail-sized pin of the dear leader just noticeable over her left collarbone. Richard rambled in Korean for a good minute, maybe setting up something special. The waitress was already holding a bottle of baijiu, Chinese rice wine that was the local high-octane brain cell killer of choice. She poured the deceptively clear liquid into my glass first, beaming in a let's see this foreigner get good and fucked up kind of way. In spite of the anti-romantic lighting, Richard insisted it was as close to romance that any of these girls was going to get. He said they were specially selected, the most attractive and talented daughters of only the highest officials who were allowed to venture into China, only to be confined with the bounds of a restaurant planted in Shenyang's own Koreatown. 3 more girls ventured into the space by the window next to a drum set, and they each perfectly struck up a tune in unison, into what sounded like Korean polka pop. The waitress then approached with a plate of steaming green bok choy and another plate of bulgogi, which I scarfed down to absorb the impact from the snowballing damage from the baijiu, along with the previous cocktails at Sophie's. The waitress returned once again as the polka pop drummed on with a bouquet of plastic flowers and handed them to me. I smiled at Richard, asking for guidance. Richard leaned in and explained over the music that the waitress had commissioned me to pass the bouquet to the girl that I liked the most. I nodded slowly, smiling, still too drunk to be bothered by the amp's horrid sound quality, and waited for the music to stop. I managed to stand up, walked over, and gingerly handed the bouquet to the guitarist, who reached out to gleefully accept the flowers. I gave her a thumbs up. Richard bellowed and clapped as I rejoined him at the table, not ready for another round, but revived just enough by the food, consummated with the rice and that tasty sauce of crushed chili peppers. We clanked final glasses of Yanjing and downed them, smacking them both empty back onto the table, immediately dissolving into a what now moment. Stepping out into the night, the itch to find out who issued the threat against America had evaporated, burned away by not just alcohol, but the curiosity to see what the hell else was coming from around the corner. I followed Richard away from the busy traffic and down an alley up to an old, heavy wooden door with thick European brass ornamentation. Richard briefly rapped on the door. It quickly cracked open, revealing a brilliantly sober, tall supermodel ballerina. By the dexterity of his diction, Richard's Korean did not seem affected by the booze. The ballerina listened, glancing between him and me, her hair pulled neatly back into a bun. She was dressed in an extravagant, multi-layered black silk and gray chiffon party dress, lined with silver. Following a few smiling glances and excited questions, we were through the door. It closed with a medieval wooden iron thud, like one of those doors in a 1970s vampire flick. We walked into a darkly lit, heavily curtained foyer, now evoking a 1960s movie set for Wuthering Heights. She sat us down at a round wooden table next to a grandiose curved flight of stairs and ran up them like a kid to fetch her friends. Translating, Richard explained they were not open yet, but he still wanted to introduce me to the girls. It was soberingly quiet in there, a complete contrast to the previous venue in every way. Richard's friend returned with 2 other supermodel ballerinas, who apparently all lived on site together. As they sat, Richard took over in genteel Korean and handed me the translation.
They just got really excited. They want to practice their English. They never get a chance.
As soon as I glanced over at the trio, the awkwardness was insurmountable, but it felt like I was facilitating some kind of therapy for these girls who are bound on honor of their parents from venturing outside. Richard's friend turned to him and took a politely sad tone as she complained, and Richard explained that they had to return upstairs. They stood up and waved goodbye and floated back behind the velvety curtain like kids who'd been called home by a decidedly authoritarian daddy. We had just infiltrated a space to which the girls were confined by Chinese law and North Korean iron paranoia. It was a different kind of Berlin Wall. Richard and I left through the same heavy door we come through, once again back into the night air.
The whole area we are in, a long time ago, it used to belong to Korea. So that's why you get a lot of people here still speaking Korean.
I had no idea. Thanks for this amazingly cool little tour. We walked back to the street, and the what now moment was once more upon us. Back by the flow of traffic, Richard checked a text message on his Nokia.
Well, I have a friend now. He's still there at another place. You wanna meet a guy from Chinese intelligence?
Richard asked, again trying to mask the innate awkwardness with as much casual delivery to the words as he could muster. Still drunk, I amiably, reliably acquiesced. 34-year-old Randy Chen was in a deep sleep, maybe a nice dream. He slept soundly most nights, as he was the barkeep of San Marcos, a local tavern which had evolved into an institution among the Americans, a go-to for both Japanese and American consular staff, across the street from them both, and the occasional closure to the public for one of Monroe's special parties, which required widespread plastic sheeting whenever Sophie's was not available. Randy had befriended Pete, my boss, who not only afforded Randy free English training, but upon Randy achieving superstar student status, got him sponsorship to go to the United States on a student visa. I also had just paid Randy a handsome amount of cash up front, 12,000 renminbi, or about $1,500, to rent his very local apartment for about 6 months as soon as he left. It got me within a 60-second sprint to the U.S. Consulate, if the need ever arose. Past the next corner beyond San Marcos was another more pricey, layered upscale bar named Bacchus, adorned with a backlit signbox visage of the god of wine and merriment hanging over the door. There was also live music from the occasional traveling Filipino bands which passed through en route to Beijing. Filipino musicians were very much a thing in China, having had access in Asia to some of the best musical training available, aside from being culturally nurtured with superb talent. From the moment Richard had offered to introduce me to his friend working in Chinese intelligence, I weighed possible avenues to keep the night going, and San Marcos figured chiefly among them. The energy of 2 New Yorkers on the other side of the world refused to fade. The steady flow of alcohol made for less memories, but walking up to a table by another stage in another bar, Richard introduced his friend. In the alcoholic haze and music pounding from another badly engineered sound system, all that made it into memory was that Richard's friend was named Edward, and had spent a lot of time in Garden Grove and Pacifica, California, home to a fair share of people on America's bleeding edge of tech development. A thick pair of glasses made Richard's friend seem more innocent, and maybe that was the general idea. He was just out that night entertaining a small group of friends, who he promptly apologized to because he was leaving to hang out with these other two good friends who had just showed up. It was finally time to call Randy, regardless of how deeply he might be sleeping.
Yeah,
Randy answered, in his annoyed but very well pronounced and natural sounding American English. Hey man, it's me. I need a huge favor. I just don't know if you're up for it.
what is it, man? It's like after what, 3 o'clock?
Can you open the bar? I will make it worth your while. Look, I'm stranded out here with a friend from New York. He has a guy with him that I really can't talk about it on the phone. Fuck, I'm sorry, man.
How long are you gonna be?
Maybe an hour. I just really want you to meet these guys before you fly off to Chicago. It was a long 5 seconds, but Randy agreed.
All right, man, just this once. I'll pass you the keys tonight for the apartment, I guess, and...
The three of us piled into the back seat of a 2 renminbi red taxi, a breed of reliable night carriage destined for post-Olympic extinction, but which were regularly driven by archetypal Chinese everymen, all their varieties of dental configurations, smells, and rotundities. As we approached a red light, Edward, whose drunkenness started to raise asshole alarms, explained to Richard that he needed to get to his wallet. Richard was equally drunk and insisted on asking why. Edward pulled out his ID for the Ministry of State Security, the Chinese version of the CIA, and spoke to the driver in English and Mandarin.
I am Chinese intelligence. You can go through the red light. Mayo and tea, no problem. Just go. I gotta take a piss.
Such was how the night began to end. The humble red taxi carted us through the night with no pedestrians in sight. We finally pulled up in front of Randy's tavern. Randy opened the door and locked it behind us once everybody had stumbled in. Richard and Edward slumped into a couple of chairs and a table by the door, trudging through slurred, drunken banter back and forth between English and Mandarin. I don't know why Richard wanted to introduce me to this guy. Maybe the alcohol really was taking over between them, so I spent the time talking with Randy. Do you know what they're saying?
I don't know, and I don't give a fuck,
Randy said, before Richard approached and asked Randy to open the locked door so they could smoke a cigarette outside. Randy grudgingly obliged, closed the door, and climbed back behind the bar, checking the bill he was compiling by hand.
Total comes out to 520 renminbi.
I blinked. What?
Your friends left already. The bill is 520.
I hopped off the bar stool and ran to the window, peering outside.
Do you have it or not?
Randy pressed. Well, this never happened before, so no one ever fucking stiffed me with a bill before.
So what do you think we should do?
Asked Randy, stifling anger with as much disappointment. I turned around, back fully against the wall. Can I get it to you tomorrow after I get paid?
On top of the 3,000 you still owe me for the rent.
Yeah. As Randy angrily thrust his apartment key into my hand, I doubted I would ever see Richard again. It just didn't make sense. There just wasn't any excuse. I'd saved the vengeance for another day as I ascended the stairs to Randy's apartment that he'd cleaned up for me to move into. I opened the door into a new chapter and clambered onto the bed and went to sleep that night, not knowing what was going to happen outside the Japanese Consulate the next morning, a mere 60 seconds from my new apartment door. It took me a couple of days to process Richard's betrayal. I'd relegated it to just another lost gamble on a nightlife adventure, and sharing social space with 2 enemies of the United States was enough for one night. It was one of those cases where knocking on the devil's door got me the result I should have expected, but somehow I hadn't learned from it yet. May 8th, 2002, 1:42 p.m. The knock on my own metal door the next day was unfamiliar, jarring, and persistent. "Just a sec," I shouted, annoyed until I realized how late it was in the day. The anger at Richard returned with the grogginess as I pull on a black tee and a pair of jeans, the shuffling of my bare feet across the dusty 1970s color pattern linoleum echoing through the apartment. I unlocked and opened the door. The thudding metal screech revealed a Chinese version of Mulder and Scully, right down to the trench coats, a plainclothes cop and his female translator. The cop calmly flashed his ID, and the translator spoke up.
"Good morning. I hope we're not disturbing you, but we need to ask,"
the translator said. "Yeah?"
"Have you sheltered or have been asked to shelter any North Koreans to live with you during your stay in China?"
No. They exchanged a few words between them, deciding what to do next, and the translator looked back at me.
"All right, well, thank you, and we're sorry to disturb you,"
she said, turning to her partner.
"Thank you,"
he said, and maybe one of the few cordial expressions in English recommended in interactions with foreigners. They turned away, trudging down the dingy, burnt coal dusted stairwell. I lingered for a moment, shaking my head, and closed the door. "Like I would even tell you," I muttered, heading back to finish getting dressed. What exactly the fuck? I only learned what had happened from a phone call with Monroe a couple of hours later. A North Korean family, father, a mother, and daughter, had tried to retreat into the grounds of the Japanese Consulate and claim asylum. They didn't make it because a uniformed Chinese cop, fuckhead moron that he was, violated international law by physically dragging them all back outside the perimeter of the compound, so they could be punished and sent back to North Korea. Once handed over to North Korea, the father, I was told by someone working at the consulate, was tortured with a metal hook inserted under and out the other side of his collarbone, as an example made to anyone else thinking of making the same attempt to escape. The day after the North Korean refugee incident, I still needed to take back some ground from that night with Richard. In this case, it was the Middle Eastern guy that had made the threatening comment while walking out of the restaurant. At the consulate, I met with a black-haired thin man sporting a mustache and wearing a dark suit, who was working in security. We met in a private conference room, just the barest plastic and metal furniture with that soulless fluorescent lighting, where I told him everything that had transpired. He gave me his card, and we parted ways.